I, like many Native Americans, live in two worlds. As a result, I face many challenges, finding a balance between the two worlds, being proud of who I am, where I come from, and at the same time embracing life outside the Navajo reservation. As a Navajo Hopi, I have a rich heritage that includes historical traumas not widely known and not taught as a part of the history of this country. A history which has shaped who I am and that inspires me to share it with those not aware of the adversity and triumphs in that untaught history.
I wanna ride, but let me drive. I'm gonna get us home tonight. I'll be on. Don't drink and drive. It's like suicide. Move over. I'm taking over. It'll be alright. So buckle up tight, I'll get us home tonight. Hey oh, hey oh, hey oh, hey oh.
Native Americans are the most underrepresented minorities in all of North America. The media has consistently misrepresented Native Americans and depicted them as only existing during colonization and Western expansion times. The lack of exposure further marginalizes and continues a cycle of dehumanizing arrests in a society with a history built off an endless domino effect of systematic racism produced from generational trauma, genocide and cultural genocide, identity erasure, sexual assault, and undocumented accounts of missing Native women. Generational trauma is a constant force passed down through families and doesn't necessarily have to affect an individual directly, but is something that is attached to many Native identities. This trauma is historically ingrained in a history of people, a pattern of demoralization and a pattern of disempowerment that is carried out against a people of one group by another. The history of Native American genocide, concentration camps, and Indian boarding schools are specific patterns in U.S. history that carry subsequent influences and stigmas that are inevitably associated with indigenous people. These chain of events that have led Native communities to the conditions they are now is because of the damage caused by the agenda of assimilation, decimation, and relocation of Native Americans. The historical factors that continue to strike the current state Native communities are issues no minority willingly subjects themselves to. Generational trauma just scratches the surface of the numerous issues that follow. Over 100 million indigenous peoples were massacred by white settlers with genocidal intent to deliberately kill Native Americans during the colonialism and Western expansion times. The methods they used in order to achieve their purpose were uncivilized and inhumane, to put it frankly. Fundamentally, indigenous people were too different. Their skin too dark, their languages were foreign, and their worldviews and spiritual beliefs were beyond comprehension. The solution was clear: exterminate and assimilate the Native American nation, the process of which carried on for more than 500 years, resulting in constant conflict between the Native Americans and U.S. government. The policies adopted by the U.S. government to accomplish these goals included the termination of tribal rights, forced sterilization of Native American women, the implementation of Indian boarding schools, and forced relocation. Prior to the reservation system, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act on May 28, 1830. In 1851, the United States Congress passed the Indian Appropriations Act that authorized the creation of Indian reservations. The actions taken by the U.S. government aimed to control and confine the Native American populations and included forced relocation for tribes. Most notably known as the Trail of Tears, through 1838 and 1839, the Cherokee Nation were forced from their land east of the Mississippi River to present-day Oklahoma. In 1864, the deportation and attempted ethnic cleansing of the Navajo people, also known as the Navajo Long Walk, to Bosque Redondo, New Mexico, occurred following the Indian Appropriations Act. These forced marches resulted in thousands of indigenous people suffering from exposure to disease and the elements, starvation, exhaustion, as well as numerous deaths en route, many at the hands of the soldiers. To put the reality of the Navajo Long Walk into a context that illustrates the atrocity that it truly was, the Bosque Redondo Reservation internment camp is the equivalent to a concentration camp in form and purpose. These camps imprisoned thousands of Navajos who survived the Long Walk, many of which were captured and detained, while countless Navajos were killed in retaliation of attempted escape, and the few that were lucky enough to flee took refuge in Canyon de Chelly.
What's so wrong about us and why we're not much different than you? A lot of us didn't get to learn what we wanted about our culture. They didn't teach us about all of the history and why they did it, or why it's necessary to throw away our culture and take on their life and how they live. Our teachers, our elders, our grandpas and our grandpas, they didn't really, I heard a lot of people didn't get taught our language and our ways, our traditions, just because they were scared to teach us because of what they went through during boarding schools and these camps that they set up, these concentration camps.
Think of the historical traumas that we endured, where is like somewhat nerve-wracking, and to say that how one man can treat another so brutally. And when you see the term Holocaust, you think of like events in World War II and in Germany, and just war or nuclear devastation. And the term Holocaust is like it's a damage to the people on a large scale. And just as the story of Native Americans a long time ago were cleaned out on a very large scale. During the Holocaust, we all know of, the POWs in Germany were stationed and filtered so who can go where in some certain areas. Just as how Native Americans were concentrated into groups in the 1870s and still to this day on their own reservations. It's a harsh truth, but it's a truth nonetheless. It's been a hard thing to realize why we're all so different, or why there is this argument between white people and us to be real connected to the rest of the world. With these reservations, we're basically isolated. When I grew up, I never thought of it, but now that I'm older, we're basically isolated. I found that when I was growing up to be a little scary to go outside of the reservation because we were discriminated and people just stared at us differently. They talked to us differently, talked to us as though we were less of a person, and that we didn't belong. I witnessed these events in Native American tribes, the glorious and the devastating. And just as though how maybe the U.S. saw themselves as a growing country, and now it's basically sort of a struggling people and tearing down itself among each other. It's all been a dark history. It's been a dark history beneath the promised lands.
Indian boarding schools, also known as Indian residential schools, were established in the United States during the late 19th century and the mid-20th century, with the primary objective of assimilating the Native American youth by removing them from their homes, to remove them from the influences of their culture and traditions. Many of these schools modeled after the famous quote, "Kill the Indian, save the man." Christian missionaries instituted the first boarding schools, funded by the U.S. government, and forced tens of thousands of indigenous children to attend and adopt the ways of the white man. These Indian boarding schools were a part of the United States policy of forced assimilation, aimed at eradicating indigenous identities through cultural genocide with the goal of reprogramming Native American children. Native American children were forbidden to speak their languages, be recognized by their given native name, wear traditional clothing and hair, and practice their cultural traditions and beliefs. Native children were given an English name, new clothes, haircuts, Christianized, and were told to abandon their way of life, because the white people believed the Native American race was inferior to the civilized European American lifestyle. Children were punished if they practiced their culture, and were often penalized with soap or a beating if they were caught speaking their language. Many children who were sent to boarding schools did not return home. To this day, many tribes still seek to have the remains of their native children returned for proper burial. In many ways, boarding schools had a very similar effect that the internment camps did. During the Second World War, Navajos were recruited by the United States to serve in the field of code and communication experts. The codes that the Americans ciphered were broken by the Japanese. The Navajo language became a vital tool that the Navajo code talkers used to transmit codes that the Japanese communication experts could no longer decipher. Ironically, the same language that many Navajos were forbidden from speaking in the Indian boarding schools was the language that saved thousands of lives and ultimately won the war. Because I'm no longer your lady. Hey-oh, hey-oh, hey-oh.
As a young Native American, I feel as though I myself am a survivor, and I grew up a decent life, and up until now it's all I know, and I still have a lot to learn. A lot of Native Americans, our voice was basically silenced. And in that, we try to make ourselves heard, and a lot of us may come off as maybe assertive or mean and just complaining or whining, but I think what we're trying to do is that we've been silenced. Not because we're quiet, but because we're not allowed to talk. We weren't really trained to talk. We were forced to keep our own traditions on the down low, and we couldn't practice our own traditions. Couldn't even speak our own language in like concentration camps. But like talking about boarding schools, those were station camps that were like basically a prison camp actually, and where Native American people couldn't practice their own cultures. A lot of our grandparents don't teach us our own traditions, and they don't teach us our own language because of what they went through. Our elderly are afraid of what would happen because they experienced what happens and the consequences of speaking our own language. Anything about our traditions, they were beaten, or they were sexually assaulted, or they were killed. And that's why a lot of elders, they speak amongst themselves, and we ask them why they wouldn't teach us our language. And some of them said they didn't want to because they were scared because of what they went through, what they endured when they spoke their language, and what they did their tradition. So they didn't want to have that life for us. They wanted us to have a better life. So that's one reason why our traditional values and our way of life was stripped away from us.
Generational trauma absolutely exists. And it is real, and it still affects a lot of people today. It affects me. You know, both of my grandparents on my mom's side were sent to boarding schools. And that trauma never went away. You know, there is such a distrust for, you know, people who I even think would do me harm as a Native American because of the stories that I've been told from my grandparents. I mean, you know, some of the things that Native Americans in boarding schools dealt with were the sexual abuse, chemical castration, mutilation, cultural genocide. I mean, we weren't allowed to speak our languages in these schools. We have lost a lot of it. I don't know how to speak my own language. Either of them. I don't know how to speak any. Almost. I know my name. I know how to say hello. And that's about it. But it's, you know, and if we look at historical context, I mean, part of the reason why our alcohol and drug abuse levels in our statistics are so high within our communities is partially due to that historical trauma.
And a lot of our elders, grandparents, are going away. In an act, we're trying to educate a lot of people and make them understand our ways, just as though we understood your ways. Me and a lot of people are history in the making. We're gaining that back. We can do our traditions and we can speak our languages, and it's fascinating to some, but it's still discriminated and discouraged. But our voice and our traditions are all we have. But why can't we have our own belief? Why can't we have our freedom? Why do we have to be like you? No one wants us to learn it. The white man doesn't want us to learn our own tradition because they want us to be like him. They want us to be civilized.
Native Americans today are common byproducts of American colonialism and another one of America's current prevailing impoverished populations added to their list because of it. The circumstances Indigenous people continue to face presently was not a decision they made themselves, because no person subjects themselves to hate, murder, or enslavement. When you look at the reservations of Arizona, Oklahoma, and Dakota, recognize that when you witness an affected population, the condition Native Americans labor under are not self-inflicted. History doesn't necessarily end at a specific point in time, and in the case of racism, it remains embedded in an institutionalized system of oppression. You may not see it operate in society as it used to be, but in our current political climate, racial profiling, police brutality, and sexual assault targeted at Native Americans have become more consistent in the passing years. With the growth of media and American culture, the representation of minorities continues to remain limited and controlled. In particular, many portrayals of Native Americans are based on misconceptions and stereotypes, which are built off of a lack of insight and knowledge regarding Indigenous people. This lack of knowledge is a product of historical whitewash, to put it simply. Native Americans are commonly portrayed as savages, immoral, unintelligent, drunks, childlike, aggressive, and poor. Nor are they the merciless Indian savages described in the Declaration of Independence. Many people allow themselves to remain ignorant, which clouds their perspective regarding Indigenous people, whether intentional or not, and as a result perpetuates the misconceptions of Native Americans in today's media. It is this mindset that Native Americans are not people, but are an object or belonging to be owned by non-natives. This sense of entitlement, this expression of white privilege has a long history that continues to manifest itself in national narratives, popular entertainment, marketing schemes, and sporting worlds. These factors are detrimental to the current state of Native Americans. In the case of Indigenous women, the media's portrayal of them is that they are exotic, based solely on their appearance. The long hair, beaded jewelry, and brown skin have become a fetish for entertainment to non-natives who disregard the humanity and culture of these Native women. Everyone thinks it's cool to look Native, but not to be one.
My brother, when he didn't get to finish school and he dropped out because he got sick, got pneumonia or something, and they didn't let him back into school. So they just dropped him because he didn't come to school. They thought he would just not come to school. He didn't want to learn. They helped other kids, white kids, when they were down, and gave them tutors and everything. And my brother, they just told him he's not going to make it. Basically, just straight out, he's not going to graduate. They looked at us differently. The school system looked at us differently. They favored more white students than us. So that's why he dropped out of school, because they favored the white kids more, even though he tried.
I personally have had experiences where, with racism, people calling me a redskin, people calling me a Guani, people calling me a drunk, homeless, go back to the prairies, go back to the mountains, wherever you're from. Part of the research that I've been doing here at the college is understanding Native American populations, and as of the 2014 census, there were 5.2 million people in the United States who identified themselves as Native American or Alaskan Native. What this means is that less than 1% of the population of the United States is Native American. I think that kind of makes us a target. Sports franchises such as the Redskins and the Chiefs, I mean, those in and of themselves are discriminatory terms. Redskin is a slur. Calling everyone chief, that's a slur as well. There's still such a stigma that Native Americans are savages and that we're uncivilized and that we're drunks and worthless, and it's terrible because these stigmas end up harming our communities. What we experience and what we go through falls on deaf ears a lot of the time, and this keeps the stigma alive. And as far as stereotyping goes, none of it is true. We're not savages. We're not a primitive people. We're not, these weird things that people think that we are. We are human beings. And we have a beautiful culture. The stereotypes destroy that. Absolutely. It's genuinely damaging to us. What most people will find in doing research about our people and about our cultures and our histories is that none of those stereotypes are true, and that these stigmas are put in place aren't real. That's cultural erasure. We still exist, and those stereotypes and stigmas need to stop. Yeah, I mean, in my own experience, I've been asked if I wear deerskin. I've been asked if I live in teepees, which I think is the most ridiculous thing, like, to ever, for a Native American to be asked. Teepees are tents. They're tents. It makes me laugh to think about these things because of this ignorance. And even within our own Native American communities, there's a lot of this, happening. Every single culture on the planet has had internal conflicts, and that's no different than with Native Americans. As for as for people who are not part of any Native American culture to try and stereotype us, I personally find it hilarious. Their ignorance is just astounding. People that believe that we still hunt buffalo to survive, and that every single Native American lives on a reservation. Don't be ignorant. Just Google some stuff.
One of the greatest challenges that Indigenous natives face, especially the women, is being victims of sexual assault and rape. The high rates of sexual violence against Native women correlate with the high rates of missing Native women. Violence, disappearance, and murder are closely interconnected. Native American women are 3 times more likely to become victims of rape and sexual assault than any other racial group, and murder rates of Native women are 10 times higher than the national average in the United States. There are numerous factors that play into targeted assaults against Native women, including hypersexualization of Native women in American media entertainment. High numbers of Native women report being raped at some point in their life. 2/3 of the perpetrators are non-Native and are unlikely to ever face formal charges for their crimes in state or federal court. The jurisdictional boundaries set by the U.S. government prevents tribes from prosecuting non-Indian perpetrators for major crimes, such as rape and sexual assault, which have to be prosecuted in federal court. Non-Natives make up the vast majority of sexual violence against Native women at 96%. Reports of sexual assault and or rape of Indigenous women are too often met with no response or investigation by law enforcement, which illustrates just how little society cares about Native women. In addition, the rates of missing Native women are not accurately tracked on any level, whether it is tribal, state, or federal. The tragic reality is that nobody knows the actual number of missing and murdered Native American women. The fact that there hasn't been an effort in the media, law enforcement, or the general public shows that lack of understanding of how large the problem is.
In my own experience, I think that for the most part, Native American culture is kind of sexualized in a way. It's put up on this pedestal that doesn't exist. You look at the spaghetti westerns of the 1950s and 60s, where the Native Americans in those types of mediums were always portrayed as these really kind of buff, beautiful, angular people. Those Native American men and women were sexualized to the point where they would wear loincloths, and that's not a whole lot of tribes did that or do that or ever have done that. I think that another big issue for us is that since there are so few of us, we are almost rare in a way sexually. For people who would otherwise sexualize our cultures and our peoples and our skin tones and our facial features and our body features, and I think that there is this hypersexualization of Native American women physically because of this. I mean, because we've got it. We've got the looks, man. High cheekbones, prominent brows, broad jaws. I mean, we have beauty standards that the rest of, that I think a lot of people seek. Because of this over-sexualization, I absolutely think that Native American women are targeted by human traffickers because of these reasons.
So we were more prone to falling apart or discrimination or just problems within our own community and our own reservations, like, say, sexual assault. We were pretty much swept under the rug, and no one really cared about us that much, and which means that we were like an easy target. or abduction, and that makes up half of the population on the reservation.
You know, you look at the current human trafficking problem that plagues every single tribe in the United States, and oftentimes what happens to these women is that they are they are trafficked and killed, and oftentimes what happens with that human trafficking is there's a lot of sexual assault and rape and general sexual violence. You know, this just makes me so sad to think about, because there's a lot of people that don't live through these experiences. Most Native American women that are trafficked turn up dead somewhere. And the ones that do end up coming back are oftentimes just traumatized beyond belief. Sexually, mentally, it's absolutely horrible. And I do think that the way that Native Americans, Native American women specifically, have been portrayed in the media throughout the last century or so is a big part of the problem currently.
Well, we're not trying to say that we want all these things, that we deserve all these things. But all we want is just freedom to be ourselves.
One of the challenges Native Americans face today is the lack of education surrounding their diverse and unique cultures. A common misconception is that all Native Americans are the same, which is far from the truth. Each Native American tribe has its own identity, culture, customs, and beliefs. Most Americans don't even know what they don't know about the history of Native people, much of which involves mistreatment at the hands of the United States government. Stereotypes, fetishization, and culture appropriation are only a few examples of how Native identity is twisted by the media, as well as by our society. These misunderstandings and mischaracterizations mislead with inaccurate portrayals that are harmful to Native Americans, and as a result, people are led to believe that natives are dangerous, savages, and exotic solely based on the aesthetic of their culture and skin. This type of mindset allows people to assume that it's okay to be prejudiced against a group and continue to perpetuate this cycle of racism. However, this form of oppression is not exclusive to non-natives. Natives are just as capable of acting prejudice against natives just like everyone else. A common example of natives hurting one another oftentimes surrounds the topic of one's blood quantum, resulting in some natives judging others within their own tribe as to whether they think an individual tribal member is truly native or native enough. This is a common issue that plagues native communities.
You know, growing up as half Laguna Pueblo and half Lakota Sioux, I've never really felt like I belonged to either because of the fact that I am both. And any time that I try to talk to someone who is Lakota, in which they, reject me because I'm not full-blooded Lakota. I am Lakota Sioux, I am Laguna Pueblo, I am Irish, and I am Scottish. We have to stop doing that to each other as Native Americans. There's still, certain things like we just did a piece over in the theater department called I'm Native and, which Cody was a part of, that really kind of talked about that. There were people who shared personal testimonies of not feeling safe within their own tribes because of their issue of blood quantum or where they grew up or if they grew up traditionally or not. And, we have to stop doing that to each other. We just have to. We don't have any room to do that anymore.
In the Navajo culture, our language is sacred and it is important for the younger generations to learn it. We practice our language to preserve history and culture because it's an integral part of our identity. Without our native language and culture, we will lose our self-identity. And in spite of the ugly history that this country's native people endured, the genocide, forced removal, internment camps, Indian boarding schools, and broken promises, the Navajo code talkers who fought in the Second World War used the Navajo language to create an unbreakable code to help end the war in the Pacific, as well as saving countless lives. When people take parts of the Native American culture and perpetuate a portrayal of an Indian character that's a one-dimensional stereotype of an unintelligent poor drunk, the issue isn't that you've behaved offensively, but you've created a threat. The misrepresentation depicted by these common stereotypes is one of the many reasons why Native Americans are turned away from jobs, profiled as criminals, and targeted for sexual violence and hate crimes. Our society isn't perfect and will never meet the expectations of everyone. However, by continuing to embrace our culture and traditions and strong family ties, even with all the negativity and hardship Native Americans have endured, they have preserved their traditions and continue to teach their histories to the younger generations to ensure the survival of their cultures. This is why acknowledging what has happened and educating instead of ignoring it is so important.
You know, there is a lot of bad. I think that there's definitely cultural erasure.
I realized there was a lot of, not just in school, but how people looked at us outside of the reservation. To Idaho, like just going up there through Colorado, through Utah, it was just these big cities full of white people. People were just looking at us. They were staring at us like, I don't know, we looked like savages, I guess you can say, to put it plainly, just because I didn't want to be different. So because of that, I had to grow up as a white man, or grew up to be a white man. And a lot of us didn't want to learn our traditions just because we didn't want to be different, or we didn't want to have people abuse us, or we didn't want to have people laugh at us or anything. So we just didn't learn our traditions.
I think that there's definitely room for people in the United States specifically to learn more about us. People often write us off as being an ancient people that don't really exist anymore and that our traditional ways are gone. There is a lot of good and there is a lot of bad. And in my experience, I've seen both ends of that spectrum.
Thank you for hanging around. All the teepees are down. Trailers are gone. Powwow is done. Thank you for hanging around. Hey oh, hey oh, hey oh. Oh, how life is sweet. Oh, what a treat. Just you and me, tapping our feet. It's our arbor tonight. Hey oh, hey oh, hey oh. Hey I when I think I'm sad and lonely, and I begin to worry, and I know you're out there thinking of me somewhere. When you think you're